I think the first thing that I should say is thank you for being so patient and sticking around. Several days ago, or about a week ago, 3 Baha'i scholars at the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion in Chicago walked into a room where they were to give their papers, and there was absolutely nobody there. And we sat around, and nobody came, so finally we decided to sort of have our own little group around the table. Later on, 1 or 2 people came in, but they were looking for other panels. And then, as if that was not the worst thing that could have happened to us, at the end of the session, the commentator, non-Baha'i commentator, asked the very profound question, "What are you Baha'is doing here? You're just proselytizing." So it's really a great pleasure to have an opportunity to be here. And I'm going to try and summarize some of these, some of the things that I would like to say, because it is very late and you have been extremely patient. What I would like to do is talk about the visions of Shoghi Effendi, or the visions that he had of the future as expressed in the Advent of Divine Justice, and just look at a few of these visions, because the book is simply too comprehensive for me to survey all of the visions here today. I particularly would like to look at the 7-year plan and the way in which Shoghi Effendi talked about the turmoils of the times and the possibilities of the future. Talk a bit about how he envisioned the obstacles that would face Baha'is, and then something about the new race of men that he envisioned. Also a few things about the spiritual prerequisites, and then perhaps end with the most challenging issue. During the late 1930s, it must have been tremendously reassuring to the Baha'i communities in the United States and Canada when they received the long letter from Shoghi Effendi entitled The Advent of Divine Justice. The worldwide economic depression was spreading havoc in every sphere of human activity, superseded only by the ominous rumblings of the impending world war. Few secular, religious, and national leaders could see beyond the dismal present or envision much beyond their own group survival. Fewer still could see or dare to speculate upon the possibility of a twofold process in which an old world order was being rolled up while a new world order was being unfolded. While many idealists dreamt of such a possibility, they did so with little direction and no spiritual power. The Baha'is, however, not unaffected by the buffeting forces of the decade, were being guided by the appointed guardian of their fate, who clearly envisioned the path through the dark days ahead. The advent of divine justice was both their light and their map, directing their steps towards the future. Shoghi Effendi and the Advent provided the Baha'is of the United States and Canada not only with the inspiration and instructions to carry out their teaching mission, but also with clear visions of their glorious future. North American Baha'is were to see themselves as the spiritual descendants of the Dawnbreakers, ushering in not by their death, but through living sacrifice that promised world order that shall ordain to enshrine that priceless jewel, the world civilization of which the faith itself is the sole begetter. Shoghi Effendi was very much concerned about how the Baha'is would face up to these responsibilities. His vision of a world civilization based upon the teachings of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha's tablets of the divine plan are the golden threads running throughout the book. And along these golden threads are other visions embodying the various opportunities for Baha'is who are steadfast. These visions represented the stages through which the North American Baha'is would pass on their way to realizing their spiritual destiny. The most important of these visions related to the 7-year plan, which was initiated in 1937 and then in its second year, described by Shoghi Effendi as the first and practical step towards the fulfillment of the mission prescribed in those epoch-making tablets. Shoghi Effendi reminded the North American Baha'is, whose visions might have been limited to the completion of the 7-year plan, that the consummation of that plan could result in no more than the formation of at least one center in each of the republics of the Western Hemisphere. Whereas the duties described in those tablets call for a wider diffusion and imply the scattering of a far greater and more representative number of the members of the North American Baha'i community over the entire surface of the New World. And even then, the mission of the North American believers would not end. Instead, according to Shoghi Effendi's visions, based upon the tablets of the divine plan, the North American Baha'is would carry forward into the 2nd century of the Baha'i faith the glorious work initiated in the closing years of the first. In this mission, they would, as envisioned by Shoghi Effendi, assist in guiding the activities of the isolated and newly fledged centers and in fostering their capacity to initiate in their turn institutions, both local and national, modeled on their own. This achievement would satisfy only the immediate obligations of Abdu'l-Baha's plan, divine revealed plan. Little by little, Shoghi Effendi carefully fed the North American believers his vision of the larger vision embodied in the tablets of the divine plan. Once their inter-American tasks and responsibilities were discharged, he pointed out, then their intercontinental mission would enter upon its most glorious and decisive phase, a phase which, according to Abdu'l-Baha, would witness the American believers carrying the message of Baha'u'llah from the shores of America through Europe, Asia, Africa, Australia, and the islands of the Pacific. And once having accomplished this task, the American community, as promised by Abdu'l-Baha, would find itself securely established upon the throne of an everlasting dominion. But even this great accomplishment would not mark the end of their mission. The future contained much more. Who knows, Shoghi Effendi told the North American believers, but that when this colossal task has been accomplished, a greater, a still more superb mission, incomparable in its splendor, and foreordained by them, by Baha'u'llah, may not be thrust upon them. Shoghi Effendi knew only too well what awaited the small community of North American believers in the days ahead. They could not expect to be spared the turmoil of the times. The stronghold, Effendi pointed out, one by one and day after day, are to outward seeming being successfully isolated, assaulted, and captured. As the lights of liberty flicker out, or flicker and go out, as the din of discord grow louder and louder every day, as the fires of fanaticism flame with increasing fierceness in the breasts of men, as the chill of irreligion creeps relentlessly over the soul of mankind, the limbs and organs that constitute the body of the faith of Baha'u'llah appear in varying measure to have become afflicted, and the crippling influence that now hold in their grip the whole of the civilized world. But the North American Baha'is had nothing to fear, for Shoghi Effendi's visions of the future placed all turmoil and disorder then ravaging the world, including the faith, in proper perspective. Out of this turmoil and tribulation of these times, opportunities undreamt of would be born, and circumstances unpredictable created that would ultimately lead to the establishment of the New World Order. Although at the time the future looked bleak and the North American Baha'i community was small in number, Shoghi Effendi assured them that they were the chief remaining citadel, the mighty arm holding aloft the standards of the unconquerable faith, and that they would be universally regarded as the cradle as well as the stronghold of the future world order. Those of us too young to remember, or who were not yet born, can only imagine how Shoghi Effendi's visions of the possibilities awaiting the North American believers energized their spirits and illuminated their own limited visions. Think what it must have meant to those believers, so small in number and only in the second year of the first plan, to read the inspiring words of Shoghi Effendi, urging them on to new possibilities beyond their wildest dreams. In surveying the possibilities of the future, Shoghi Effendi mentioned the election of the International House of Justice and its establishment in the Holy Land, the gradual erection of the various dependencies of the first house of worship of the West, the codification and promulgation of the ordinances of the Most Holy Book, the formation of officially recognized courts of Baha'i law in certain countries of the East, the recognition by certain Islamic countries of the independent religious status of the Baha'i national and local assemblies, the establishment and recognition of the Baha'i faith as a state religion, and finally the establishment of a Baha'i nation, which, as Shoghi Effendi envisioned, would culminate in the emergence of the worldwide Baha'i Commonwealth, animated wholly by the Spirit and operating solely in direct conformity with the laws and principles of Baha'u'llah. Achieving these possibilities of the future would not be easy. The task would be long and arduous, but the North American believers would succeed because they were the champion builders of the mightiest institutions of the faith of Baha'u'llah. At times, the course Baha'u'llah had traced for them would be lost in the threatening shadows with which a strengthening humanity is now enveloped, as Shoghi Effendi pointed out. Yet, according to Shoghi Effendi's vision, Baha'u'llah's unfailing light would continue to shine upon the North American believers with such brightness that no earthly dusk would ever eclipse its splendor. Shoghi Effendi was no mere visionary, ignoring the harsh realities of the present in some blind directionless quest for an amorphous future. His visions reflected the spiritual guidance of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, as well as the twofold process of destruction and construction, which were simultaneously transforming the entire planet. These interactive scenarios occupied much of Shoghi Effendi's vision of the future, and those Baha'is who witnessed the turmoil of the world through his vision tended to be less agitated by the threatening shadows. Shoghi Effendi did not sacrifice an iota of harsh truth in his visions of the future. North American Baha'is were constantly cautioned about the obstacles that would be placed in their path. Enemies, fierce, numerous, and unrelenting, would arise with every acceleration in the progress of their mission. But, Shoghi Effendi reminded them, if the American believers persevered, the invisible host must, as promised, rush forth to their aid. What kind of people would be needed to carry out the challenges of the 7-year plan and the subsequent plans? What type of people did Shoghi Effendi envision as the spiritual descendants of the Dawnbreakers and the champion builders of the mightiest institutions of the faith of Baha'u'llah? And how would they contribute both to the teaching and consolidation of the Baha'i faith and the spiritual regeneration of their fellow countrymen. First of all, in Shoghi Effendi's vision, the new race of men, which would be called into being by the revelation of Baha'u'llah, would remain wholly unrecognized and completely obscured unless the Baha'is made a sharp distinction between themselves and the people from which, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, God has raised them up. In particular, he mentioned the United States. The American Baha'is of the United States were informed by Shoghi Effendi that they were not chosen by Baha'u'llah to play a leading role in the birth of the world civilization because of any inherent experience or excellence or special merit of their country or people. Instead, it was only because of the patent evils and excessive and binding materialism of America and its people that Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha had singled them out to become the standard bearer of the New World Order. For only in this way could Baha'u'llah, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, demonstrate to a heedless generation his almighty power to raise up from the very midst of a people caught up in a sea of materialism, a prey to one of the most violent and long-standing forms of racial prejudice, and notorious for its political corruption, lawlessness, and laxity in moral standards, men and women who, as time goes by, will increasingly exemplify those essential virtues that will fit them for the preponderating share they will have in calling into being that world order and that world civilization of which their country, no less than the entire human race, stands in desperate need. There before them, North American Baha'is had the visions of Shoghi Effendi to guide them to their highest spiritual potential. In these visions, they could see themselves embodying the spiritual characteristics that would transform them into angels, into agents of great social and spiritual change, charged with the duty of laying a firm foundation for their country's future role in ushering in the golden age of the cause of Baha'u'llah. One cannot overestimate the spiritual and functional significance of Shoghi Effendi's visions of the future. As we read the advent of divine justice, we should begin to realize that each of his visions carries within it not only spiritual goals, but the necessary loving guidance to reach the goals. And yet within his visions are firm admonitions. Shoghi Effendi told the American Baha'is in no uncertain terms that the new world order that they were struggling to establish could never be reared unless and until the generality of the people to which they belong have been already purged from the diverse ills, whether social or political, that now so severely afflict it. In order for the North American Baha'is to fulfill their spiritual destinies, they first had to meet certain spiritual requirements, which included a high sense of moral rectitude in their social and administrative duties, absolute chastity in their individual lives, and complete freedom from prejudice in their dealings with people of a different race, class, creed, or color. Each one of these spiritual prerequisites, as envisioned by Shoghi Effendi, directly influenced the establishment of the New World Order. The first one, while not exclusively directed to the elected representatives, was specifically addressed to them because of their responsibility for laying a foundation, and a firm foundation for the universal house of justice. The second spiritual prerequisite was addressed to the youth, who in the vision of Shoghi Effendi would contribute so decisively to the virility, the purity, and the driving force of the life of the Baha'i community, and upon whom must depend, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, the future orientation of his destiny and the complete unfoldment of the potentialities with which God has endowed it. In Shoghi Effendi's view of the future, Baha'i youth, if they remain chaste and holy, will contribute to the future progress and orientation of the youth of their country. This would be their special mission. The third one, freedom from prejudice, unlike the other two spiritual prerequisites, was addressed to all Baha'is of whatever age, rank, experience, class, or color. Perhaps no other problem concerned Shoghi Effendi more than racial prejudice in American society. He called it the corrosion of which for well nigh a century has bitten into the fiber and attacked the whole social structure of American society, and said it should be regarded as constituting the most vital and challenging issue confronting the Baha'i community at the present stage of its evolution. His vision of future race relations in the American Baha'i community was uncommonly accurate for someone viewing such events from afar. He told black and white Baha'is that they had a long and thorny road beset with pitfalls, which still remains untraveled. And he cautioned them that on the distance they covered and the manner in which they traveled that road must depend the operation of those intangible influences which are indispensable to the spiritual triumph of the American believers and the material success of their newly launched enterprise. Shoghi Effendi's vision of future race relations within the American Baha'i community allowed no compromise. Baha'is of all ages and social backgrounds were expected to contribute to the solution of the vexing problem which stood in the way of the American community realizing its spiritual destiny. Freedom from racial prejudice should be, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, deliberately cultivated through the various and everyday opportunities, no matter how insignificant, whether in their homes, their business offices, their schools and colleges, conferences, conventions, summer schools and assemblies, social parties and recreation grounds. And above all else, he said freedom from racial prejudice should become the keynote of the National Spiritual Assembly. In sharp contrast to the prevailing racial theories and practices, Shoghi Effendi outlined what black and white Baha'is, American Baha'is, should do to solve the racial problem within the Baha'i community. Both races had to contribute their share to the solution of this vexing problem, tear down the barriers that divided them, and endeavor, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, day and night to fulfill their particular responsibilities in the common task which so urgently faced them. While he encouraged both races to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, he reminded them of the warnings of Abdu'l-Baha and told them to visualize, while there is yet time, the dire consequences that must follow if this challenging and unhappy situation that faces the entire American nation is not definitely remedied. Unfortunately, America did not have long to wait. The dire consequences were only a few years ahead. In the early 1940s, the worst race riot in American history up to that time broke out in Detroit. Abdu'l-Baha's and Shoghi Effendi's visions of the dire consequences of unresolved racial conflicts in America had been all too painfully true, a truth that would become increasingly more apparent in the turbulent 1960s. Shoghi Effendi's vision of how black and white Baha'is should mutually contribute to racial harmony within the Baha'i community in preparation for their role in helping their nation rid itself of racial conflicts represented an approach unprecedented in American race relations. Both races were assigned specific responsibilities. White Baha'is were to make a supreme effort, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, in their resolve to contribute their share to the solution of this problem, to abandon once and for all their usual, inherent, and at times subconscious sense of superiority, to correct their tendency towards revealing a patronizing attitude towards the members of the other race, to persuade them, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, through their intimate, spontaneous, and informal association with them, of the genuineness of their friendship and the sincerity of their intentions, and to master their impatience of any lack of responsiveness on the part of a people who have received for so long a period such grievous and slow-healing wounds. Black Baha'is, through a corresponding effort on their part, were to show by every means in their power the warmth, of their response, their readiness to forget the past, and their ability to wipe out every trace of suspicion that may still linger in their hearts and minds. In the guardian vision of racial conflict resolution and the achievement of racial unity within the American Baha'i community, neither race could place the burden of resolving the racial problem on the other race. The solution of so vast a problem, Shoghi Effendi stated, is not a matter that exclusively concerns the others. Again, he cautioned black and white Baha'is that they should not think that the problem could be easily or immediately resolved. Furthermore, he added, they also should not wait confidently for the solution of this problem until the initiative has been taken and favorable circumstances created by agencies that stand outside the orbit of their faith. Rather, according to Shoghi Effendi's vision of American race relations, the Baha'is had to believe and be firmly convinced that on their mutual understanding, their amity and sustained cooperation must depend more than on any other force or organization operating outside the circle of their faith, the deflection of that dangerous course so greatly feared by Abdu'l-Baha and the materialization of the hopes he cherished for their joint contribution to the fulfillment of that country's glorious destiny. The American Baha'i community could not have asked for a more insightful, foresighted, and glorious vision of future race relations in their country. Drawing on the writings of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, Shoghi Effendi carefully charted how black and white American Baha'is could unify themselves within the community, and based upon their unity, go forth and teach their fellow black and white Americans lessons of love and unity. But as with other visions of Shoghi Effendi, harsh realities were not ignored. Only Baha'is could deflect the dangerous course of racial conflict in America. If they failed, their failure would delay the time when America would be able to fulfill her spiritual destiny. The American Baha'i community, therefore, had and still has a double crusade, envisioned by Shoghi Effendi as a necessary process for establishing the foundation for the future role America will play in the establishment of the New World Order. First, to regenerate the inward life of their own country, and next, to assail the long-standing evils that have entrenched themselves in the life of their nation. And once again, he outlined both the hardships and glories they would have to face in the future. Their faith would be attacked, their motives misconstrued, their aims defamed, their aspirations derided, their institutions scorned, their influence belittled, their authority undermined, and their cause at times deserted by a few who will either be incapable of appreciating the nature of their ideals or unwilling to bear the brunt of the mounting criticism which such a contest is sure to involve. But they should not fear, for in Shoghi Effendi's clear vision of the unfolding of the New World Order, all these negative influences and events are essential elements in the process. The voice of criticism, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, is a voice that indirectly reinforces the proclamation of the cause. Unpopularity but serves to throw into greater relief the contrast between the faith and its adversaries, while ostracism in itself is the magnetic power that must eventually win over to its camp the most vociferous and inveterate amongst its foes. Baha'is had to understand that in Shoghi Effendi's visions of the future, they had a holy task that possessed limitless possibilities of raising to an exalted level not only the life and activities of their own community, but the motives and standards, Shoghi Effendi pointed out, that govern the relationships existing among the people to which they were being asked to labor, so fraught with peril, so full of corruption. Yet in his vision of those times, pregnant with the promise of a future so bright that no previous age in the annals of mankind can rival its glory. These, friends, are just a few of the visions of Shoghi Effendi as reflected in the advent of divine justice. Thank you very much.